Yesterday in the Senate, the opposition did not support the extension of the state of emergency beyond 14 days. States of emergency can be declared and last up to 14 days without any need for parliamentary approval. After that, they cannot be extended unless 2/3 of both the House of Representatives and the Senate support the extension. And the opposition in the Senate is given 8 senators out of 21, which means that a 2/3 majority cannot be achieved unless the opposition, at least one opposition senator, supports the resolution. We have not supported the extension of the state of emergency because we feel it is a failed strategy. It has been used over a 3-year period from 2017 to 2020. It did not achieve any lasting improvements in Jamaica's national security situation. To the contrary, we have continued to see elevated levels of violent crime and in particular murders over that period. Furthermore, it has weakened, in my opinion, the crime fighting and prosecutorial aspects of law enforcement, because it has inculcated in the security forces a culture that says you can just go and detain somebody and hold them without any recourse to the courts. And therefore, the important tasks of police to investigate cases properly, prepare cases for prosecution, and bring prosecutions to the court, which can result in convictions of violent criminals, have not been happening in the numbers that they should be. And that is the source of our problem. We need to get back to a situation where investigative techniques and investigations are properly conducted, so we have viable prosecutions and we send the criminals to prison. We support legislation that will enable the security forces to go about their business more effectively. We introduced a DNA evidence law, which has enabled DNA evidence to be used to secure prosecutions. We amended the Evidence Act to facilitate computer-generated evidence, all of the evidence through the Jamaica Eye system to be used to effectively prosecute people in court. We brought the anti-gang legislation, which is now having a great effect. And we have supported the government's attempt to further strengthen it, but they have dropped the ball and haven't brought those amendments to Parliament. We introduced the anti-lotto scamming legislation, which has been important in trying to control that particular phenomenon, which has been a source of further violence in the country. I am calling on the Prime Minister and his government to resume the Vale Royal talks. We want to be a proactive and constructive opposition that supports this national crisis of national security. We believe that if we work on this together, behind closed doors where we can have open discussions about strategy and tactics, Jamaica will benefit from that. And we are willing to do so. I've been calling on him to do this from the budget debate back in February. I called on him again in the debate on this state of emergency extension in the House on Tuesday. I hope he will accept this good faith gesture on the part of the opposition and allow us to work with the government to find solutions. There are solutions out there. We need to have more violence interrupters and enable them to do their work. The Peace Management Initiative needs to be strengthened, not defunded. We need to have a national program targeting youths who are vulnerable and at risk, to give them mentorship, to give them life skills training, and to give them vocational skills training and opportunities for employment after they've gone through that process. And there are other more tactical things that can be done as well. And the most critical point, which has been made by my colleagues, is that the JDF can and should be used extensively in support of the police in troubled areas, in the hotspots, where there are criminals with dangerous weapons who are wreaking havoc. They should be deployed in aid of the police, but the police must do the police work, and the police must investigate and prepare the cases to put those criminals behind bars. scraping up hundreds or thousands of young men without charge, detaining them for long periods of time is not the solution to our problem. It has not worked. After 3 years between 2017 and 2020, violent crime has continued. Why are we going back to a failed strategy which is suspect in terms of its constitutional compliance? The Constitution is not just an academic thing. It embodies the rights and freedoms that our people have fought and sacrificed for over centuries. We believe that it must be upheld. That is why all of us in Parliament have sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. It is not an academic thing. It is a fundamental thing. And the constitutionality of this government's use of states of emergency as an ongoing, routine, crime-fighting strategy has been brought into question in the courts, and that matter is now before the Court of Appeal and has not yet been heard. A government that respects the rule of law would not go back to that failed and suspect strategy until the courts have finally ruled and guided them on the matter. So whether it be the practical issues of how to address this terrible problem that we have, or it be the constitutional issues of the propriety of using the state of emergency in this way, we feel on both scores, there is no justification for supporting the use of the state of emergency. That is why we have done our constitutional duty to protect the Jamaican people and their rights. And I'm very proud of the opposition for having done that. It's not an easy issue because the government is going to play politics with it and trying to suggest that we don't support the fight against violent crime. That is nonsense. We want to see Jamaica move to a safe and secure society, and we are prepared to put all our efforts behind any bona fide, legitimate, and good faith effort in that regard. So I've made my call to the Prime Minister, and I'd like to hear from him soon. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning to members of the media. The opposition's position in respect of the state of emergency has been clearly articulated by myself in Parliament, by the leader of opposition, by Senator Bunting. A state of emergency, in our opinion, is a stopgap. It is a band-aid over a sore. That is what we liken it to. A state of emergency is not what is required. No, the state of emergency allows for the detention of ordinary Jamaican citizens, the deprivation of their rights for an extended period of time, and that is not what we need as a country. No. We, as an opposition, remain open to dialogue with the government. We are prepared to work with them. There are sensitive matters in respect of national security, so therefore we will not provide that information to the public at the moment. But there is a clear issue that we need to address, and it is that there appears to be a militarization of the security forces, and that is a dangerous practice. We do not want a police state. What we want is a functioning democratic society where the rules of law are upheld. We do not want to give the military the idea that they'll forever be required to operate as a police force. The role of the military should always be separated from the role of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. We need to work on strengthening the investigative capacity of the JCF. The danger we run when we take the approach of arrest first and charge after, it is not a good approach. It has never worked before. Hard policing has never worked. The opposition has always presented solutions to the country. The leader of opposition in Parliament on Tuesday provided solutions. It is for the government to listen. Senator Bunting has always provided solutions. If the government does not listen, then as an opposition, our hands are tied. And it is up to you, the people of Jamaica, to decide whether or not you want us to lead this country. But for the moment, we remain open to dialogue and discussions with the government to help them. It is their duty to invite us to the table. They need to engage all community stakeholder groups. They need to revisit the PMI. They need to look at social intervention. They need to come and have respectful dialogue between ourselves and themselves. You can't choose to go it alone, and then when you fail, you blame everybody else for the failure. And that is what is happening in the country. We as an opposition respect the position of the government. But as an opposition, we have a role to play based on the Constitution. And if you do not allow us to play that role, then you cannot blame us for the failings of the government. I'll end by saying this. It has always been the position of the opposition that we do not require a state of emergency for the military to be deployed within the communities to assist the police in the crime-fighting efforts. We remain firm in that belief. The citizens of these 7 police divisions, where there's a saturation of the military and the police now, you should not be concerned, because the government has the option right now to have all of the officers, all of the military officers and the Jamaica Constabulary Force officers remain there. We do not need to remove them from the communities. And so the time has come for us to have some serious, honest discussion as it relates to the way forward in this country. And the reality is there are many provisions, a litany of provisions available, legal statutes that are available that provide the JCF, the Minister of National Security, the Commissioner of Police with the tools to fight crime. And if we at any point in time see a reduction in the number of security officers that are present in these spaces, come tomorrow after the expiration of the state of emergency, then it is clear to our mind that this government is not serious about fighting crime. I thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. In 2011, the most fundamental amendment to our independence constitution took place when Parliament passed the amendment including the new Charter of Rights in our constitution. That Charter of Rights changed fundamentally how a state of emergency is treated with in Parliament. Up until that time, all that was needed to extend the state of emergency was a simple majority. And the JLP administration insisted that that should be changed to require a 2/3 majority of both houses. That added an additional check and balance responsibility to the opposition, because even if you didn't have the 2/3 majority in the House, even if they did not have the sufficient numbers in the House to prevent the 2/3 majority, the government would always need the cooperation of at least one senator in the upper house. No government could be required to routinely need the day-to-day cooperation of an opposition in order to function properly. So that design made it very clear that it was only in very exceptional circumstances that this should be used. And when you look at the whole scheme of the constitutional provisions for the states of emergency or the states of public disaster, what it contemplates is a scenario where the normal civil institutions of government cannot operate, such as you would have after a hurricane, extensive flooding, earthquake, or an insurrection, or the first instance would be a state of war with a foreign power. Nothing contemplated the serial and routine use of states of emergency as a crime-fighting tool. And in fact, it's completely contradictory to the Charter of Rights, which is now an entrenched feature of our Constitution. The government has continued with really what is what I refer to as a big lie, or perhaps could also be described as a false dilemma. They make it seem that if you want to have police and soldiers in your communities, in the communities where crimes are spiking, that you must have an SOE to do so. That is not true. Every single day of the year for the last 4 decades probably, the military has been deployed in support of policing right across Jamaica. It was the case when I was minister in the 2012 to 2015 period. It was the case for my predecessors, and it is the case now. So this sudden requirement that you have these states of emergency is a fiction. It is not true. It is not necessary. There are adequate powers in ordinary legislation, adequate provisions in ordinary legislation for that to occur. And therefore, we will not be assisting the government in perpetuating this fallacy, perpetuating this fiction, which is really an attempt to cover up their failure. After almost 6 years, they have failed abysmally. They have failed notwithstanding immense resources relative to any previous administration to deal with national security. And what we're seeing now is just an excuse and trying to shift blame to the opposition for their failures in this area. Thank you.
Gavin Riley from OWER today.
Morning.
I would like to get some clarification from the PNP, or I guess this question could be better posed to opposition. Clarification on the absentee votes yesterday in the Senate. The PNP had already expressed an intent not to support an extension to the SOE. So I'm just curious, why did they choose to leave as opposed to just voting no instead?
Good.
7 of the 8 opposition senators were at the sitting yesterday. The 8th is overseas in India on parliamentary business. And all 7 spoke against the extension. So each person made clear their position individually. So the fact that they did not stay until late into the evening to actually cast a vote is really of no effect. They made their position clear, and the not voting for it is the same effectively as voting against it. Those who stayed way into the evening, late into the evening, may have wanted to make a point of the record, the parliamentary voting record showing, but Hansard will record the positions of every opposition member who spoke yesterday. And everyone who is in country was in attendance and made their position clear. This thing about the only 3 or 2 or whatever is a red herring. That's a distraction. The opposition made it clear, every single senator who spoke.
Final question. The PSOJ, Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, made a statement yesterday where it said that it would support the SOEs as a stopgap measure to achieve relative peace in the 7 police divisions where they have been declared. Does the PNP agree with this stance, or is it deceiving permanence of the SOE, which is being contested?
Our position is that the state of emergency's prolonged use as a routine crime-fighting tool is unconstitutional. That's our position. That's how we understand the Constitution. And we are supported in that view by what the judge said in the habeas corpus application that came before the court in 2020, which the government is appealing because they lost that case. We don't think that it's necessary to use a state of emergency as a stopgap measure either. The zones of special operations legislation exists for that. It gives enhanced powers of cooperation between the soldiers and the police without suspending the basic human rights of our people. We are in favor, if necessary, using the Zozos in hotspot areas to bring calm to them and to also commence a process of social investment, social intervention, and rehabilitation of those communities. That is a route that we would prefer to see. Now, there may be budgetary constraints on how much social investment can be afforded at a particular point in time, but that must be sequenced to, over whatever period of time is affordable, and it should be prioritized because national security is the most important issue facing the country at this time. So we are very much in favor of using tactical approaches that address the issues. We feel that the PSOJ is misguided on that position, but we support the idea of a firm response that involves both the military and the police being deployed in areas where there are hotspots. Our position and where we differ from the government on this is that we do not feel the state of emergency is the appropriate tool for that. It degrades that very critical mechanism in the Constitution, which is really supposed to be the last resort to protect the state from being overthrown. That is what it exists for. When you use it for years on end, and you're not prosecuting the violent criminals, you're not finding any guns or ammunition, you're just keeping the place locked down, scraping up a lot of young men. Some of them have their prospects blighted because they lose their jobs. This is no way to solve the problem. This is creating more problems. So this is why we think it's an important time for the opposition to assert itself, do its constitutional duty, and draw a line in the sand. We are willing and able to cooperate with the government and provide them with the benefit of our skills and expertise and ideas. And we are, as I've said, I am calling on the Prime Minister to facilitate that. But what we will not do is ignore the oath that we have sworn and go down the road with the government of using states of emergency as if it is no big deal. It is just another tool in the toolkit for fighting crime. That is not the case. That is a dangerous way of proceeding, and we will not be party to it. Thank you.
We have a question from Althea Sumner from the Jamaica Observer. Althea, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Althea.
All right. Mr. Golding, a comment was made in the Senate yesterday that your party...
Also have a question from Sanjay Lewis from Power 106. Sanjay, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Are you hearing me?
We're hearing you. Go ahead, Sanjay.
Great. So the government is insisting that the court ruled on the matter of the detention and not the legality of the state of emergency. And the matter of detention, the Attorney General says, was addressed in the updated regulations where the review tribunal will do periodic review. And the review of detainees will not only depend on the detainee making a request to the review tribunal. You are not convinced, Mr. Golding, that this adjustment is sufficient. Tell us why.
Well, first of all, I don't think that analysis is accurate as to what the judge in the habeas corpus application actually said. He questioned several different aspects of what was being done, and the power of detention and the way it was being administered was only one aspect of that. Furthermore, these new regulations that have been promulgated, I have sought and obtained a legal opinion from a very senior Queen's Counsel in this country. And he is of the view that these regulations contravene the Constitution as well for various reasons, including, for example, that the tribunal has no power to make an order against an authorized person. And the unauthorized person regulations is defined as basically including every member of the security forces, whether police or soldiers. The powers of the tribunal are limited to the competent authority, which is a much narrower scope of persons. Furthermore, there are other aspects of the regulations. I don't want to get into that now, but there are other aspects of the regulations which are problematic and which in our opinion, and certainly the advice we have received, are not consistent with the Constitution. So I don't agree with the Attorney General in that regard.
Hi again, can you hear me now?
Yes?
All right. Okay, all right. Mr. Golding, in the Senate yesterday, a comment was made that your party will pay a political price for playing politics with this issue. What is your response to that?
I think that is par for the course in terms of how the Jamaica Labour Party operate. You know, they are going down a dubious road. We have decided that we're not following them down that road. We have stated why. Our position is clear. And then they're saying, well, we're going to pay a political price for it. In my experience, whenever we stand on principle, ultimately we are vindicated. And it is the best thing to do. To do what is right is the best thing to do. If I felt differently about the state of emergency and the way it's being used, I wouldn't have taken the decision that I took not to support its use in this way. But I believe that my oath as a parliamentarian requires me not to support the serial long-term use of states of emergency, and the resumption of states of emergency with some modified regulations is still the use of a state of emergency for the same purpose, which is as a routine crime fighting measure. It is not what the Constitution provides that power for, and it does not work. So I don't believe we will pay a political price for it, because I think that the Jamaican people will see through the politics that's being played by the government on this and realize that what we are doing is standing up for the rights of the Jamaican people. Again, we are prepared to cooperate with the government and trying to find new and better solutions for dealing with the crime problem. And we are willing to do that as soon as possible. But the reality is that taking away the rights of our citizens so that they can be detained without charge for long periods of time is not the way to go. It does not work. It degrades the human rights environment of our country. It undermines our constitutional protections, and it does not lead to better crime results. Crime has continued to be way higher than it ever was under the last PNP administration. Our average number of murders per annum was 25% lower than what has happened in Jamaica under these states of emergency. We didn't use any of that. We didn't use states of emergency. We used Unite for Change. We used the Peace Management Initiative. We used a very active legislative agenda to modernize the techniques and the toolbox available to the police. This is the kind of strategy we think should be pursued, and that has yielded results in the past, and we think can yield results again. There's also a problem with the size of the police force. The actual numbers of officers there is way lower than is required, and is way lower than is authorized by law. So the police are fighting with an army are fighting crime with a cohort, with a number of police officers. That is insufficient. That needs to be addressed very quickly. I was in South St. Catherine yesterday, and the number of officers available is 70% of what is required and what is authorized by law to be deployed there. This needs to be addressed. These are the areas where the government is falling short. They are demoralizing the police as well by not paying them the overtime that was agreed with them by their government back in 2008, and saying that they can only get 2 years out of the over 10 years that they're owed. And for those 2 years, they have to wait 6 years to receive it. That's why the police have them in court. The government needs to settle with them promptly and restore some kind of positive morale so they can get about the business of fighting criminals, which is what the police want to do. That's what they're trained to do. That's what they joined the force to do. So the whole question of any political price, I am prepared to pay a price if that is what the Jamaican people think I should pay. I do not believe that the Jamaican people will think that standing up for their rights and for the proper use of the Constitution and for the principle of the rule of law, I don't think they will exact a price from me for that. I think they will respect me for that.
Sanjay Lewis has a follow-up for you. Go ahead, Sanjay.
Thank you. With respect, Mr. Golding, most of the suggestions you have put forward are long-term strategies. But in the short term, what is the solution to address the problem? Because the government is saying their short-term strategy would be to utilize the SOE and also utilize the suggestions, some of which you have put forward. But I want to hear the short-term solution to the problem that we're now facing.
Well, I don't know how you can say that SO is a short-term solution when it's been used since 2017 and we're now in 2021. That doesn't sound like a short-term solution to me, Sanjay. I believe that what needs to happen is that the JDF and the police need to be deployed together in the troubled areas. And I believe that the legislation that we've been waiting on, strengthen the anti-gang legislation, update the firearms legislation, bring in legislation to support enhanced surveillance of suspects. These are the things that need to happen quickly. When we were in office, we did pass, conceptualized and passed into law the anti-gang legislation in 6 months. This can be done with the necessary political will, and we're prepared to help the government because they obviously are lacking in this area. In terms of short-term solutions, there's also legislation is there, Sanjay. We worked on it with the government. It was passed with our cooperation in 2017. Why is it only being used in Denham Town and in Mount Salem and in Augustown, mainly JLP constituencies, by the way? Why is it being used in that way when there are so many other communities that need that from time to time? This is why we think that the state of emergency is not the short-term solution. There are other tools in the toolbox. And some of them are things I wouldn't even want to discuss in our public media, but I'm prepared to discuss with the government but in an appropriate forum. And the Vale Royal Talks, I think, is that forum. That's why I've called for it.